We're going to talk about something that I perceive as what you might describe as dishonest, clever marketing. I see ads depicting some of the latest development in cartridges that would make you or somebody else believe that this is the latest thing, when really, in real reality, it's not the latest thing. We can start with perhaps the 6.5 PRC cartridge. I'll tell you what this cartridge is, folks. This cartridge is simply a 6.5-06 Ackley improved in another package, ballistically. Capacity-wise and ballistics performance pretty much parallels what P.O. Ackley did with improving a 30-06 case neck to 6.5 caliber and improving it many, many years ago. The statements have been made that the PRC cartridge outperforms the .264 Winchester Magnum. This is dishonest. This is simply not true. It's all about square inches. It's all about internal square inches of capacity. What that cartridge case is capable of from a velocity standpoint with the powder charges that it's capable of digesting. If you've got a cartridge that has less capacity than another cartridge, that cartridge can outperform the cartridge with the bigger capacity case. And this is what's being stated with this 6.5 PRC, that it equals or outperforms the .264 Winchester. Well, we've got to load the 6.5 PRC cartridge up to the highest potential pressures and velocities to get the performance that's being stated. And then we turn around here and underload the .264 Winchester way under its potential. Stated velocities with 143 grain EDLX bullet for the 6.5 PRC cartridge has been stated that it's 2,960 feet a second. This is factory ammunition figures that's being advertised. I've been loading and using .264 Winchester Magnum for 40-some years. I quick found out many, many years ago that I could easily get, with 140 grain bullets, 3,150 feet a second to 3,200 feet a second, depending on the individual rifle. Over the years, since that point in time, we have been blessed with a lot more available powders, different burn rates, slower burn rate powders. The slower burn rate powder builds pressure slower. So consequently, we can up our charges, increase our velocities, and still have acceptable pressure limits. So what I'm trying to describe to you here is there's no way that this 6.5 PRC cartridge performs along with a .264 Winchester Magnum. Not when everything is equal. If we load things to the same pressure levels, each cartridge, it simply isn't so. So this is where this dishonest, clever type of marketing is coming in. This isn't just limited to this. I get a lot of feedback from our videos here. A lot of feedback from people. We get people that understand and people that don't understand but think that they know it all. A very, very young set of people. And to the point that sometimes these people are rude. If you enjoy our videos and want to make a comment, be polite, but don't be rude, especially when you don't understand what you're talking about in the first place. It's been stated to me that the 6.5 PRC and the 28 Nosler is taken over as the premier cartridges. And that, I'm kind of behind the times. Well, I'm going to tell you what behind the times really is, folks. In 1983, I developed a cartridge on the 404 Jeffrey case in 7mm. I also developed a cartridge in .30 caliber on the full-length 404 case and in .338 caliber. Think back about how many years ago that was, 1983, that I did that. Who exactly is behind the times here? It's taken Nosler until about 6 or 7 years ago to come up with the 28 Nosler. Who is ahead of the time here? It wasn't Nosler. It was Randy. It was myself. I developed a cartridge that I dubbed the 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express. I've hunted all over Wyoming. I've hunted everything in Wyoming with the cartridge. And I built a lot of rifles for people over the years in that cartridge and in others that duplicate the capacity of that case. My 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express holds a grain more powder than the 28 Nosler. My cartridge was designed on the 404 Jeffrey case. The Nosler cartridge is designed off of the Remington Ultra case. That's a case that I've stated in other videos is a case that's 5 thousandths larger on the head than the 404 Jeffrey, so it's not based off of a 404 case, it's based off of a Remington Ultra case. Let's even back up some more. In the 60s, Mary Louise DeVoto, she used a 7mm by 300 Weatherby to win 1,000-yard matches, shooting 168 grain Sierra Boat Tail Match King bullets, 7mm by 300 Weatherby. The information that was printed in a Sierra reloading manual. I have the Sierra reloading manual. You can go back and research it yourself. That's the same capacity case as my 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express. That will give you over 3,200 feet a second velocity with a 175 Nosler partition. Nosler's 28 Nosler. They claim right around 3,100 feet a second with a 175 grain bullet. My cartridge loaded with the powders that I found at that time, which very few people knew of the powders and very few people know of them even today. I developed that cartridge because there was powders that were showing up. They're pulled down military powder called WC 860. WC stands for Winchester Cartridge Company. All the ball powders available in this part of the world in the United States are made by nobody other than Winchester ball powders, Winchester Cartridge Company. Pulled down 50 BMG powder. I bought it years ago from Pat McDonald in Massillon, Ohio, in 100-pound drums. I've shot up many 100-pound drums using that powder in rifles that I designed to use that, cartridge cases that I designed to use that powder, rifles that I built for other people. I burned up quite a number of 100-pound drums using that powder. I'm not behind the times. I've never been out of touch with what technology is. I simply have been way ahead of what technology is. Something somewhat like P.O. Ackley was with his improved cartridge designs. Something like what Charles Newton was in his time with the development of the Newton cartridges and so forth. I've built many rifles in all these all these various different case configurations in 7mm. My 7mm by 404, I've used the 28 Nosler, I've used the 7mm by 300 Weatherby. Leighton Simpson necked down the 8mm mag case simply to 7mm and dubbed it the 7mm Shooting Times Westerner. All those cartridges have the same powder capacity within a grain, or maybe possibly 2 grains, depending on the cartridge brass manufacturer. So they all have ballistically the same ballistics capabilities, the velocities with the various bullet weights. I still feel to this day, even though we've had a lot of powders added in the 35 years since I first came up with that 7mm by 404 cartridge, I feel that WC860 is still the best powder, and that powder's been around for a long time. It's still available. You can still buy it in bulk, 8-pound jugs or 100-pound drums. If you pick it up, I have a fair supply of this powder. We have other powders that have been developed. There are other powders to use. The closest powder to use would be Hodgson's US 869, which also is a ball powder that nearly, but not quite, duplicates the WC 860 powder that I've used for all these years. So, you see, I'm trying to explain to you folks that think that I'm behind on the technology. In fact, it's just the opposite of that. I was way ahead of the technology, way ahead of what you're claiming the technology is. I developed these rounds for a particular purpose, and that's to shoot game at a little bit further distance with high retained energy with proper bullets to cleanly take game at reasonable distances. And I'm talking about reasonable distances. And what might be a reasonable distance to me would not be a reasonable distance to somebody else, or somebody else might think that they could shoot way, way farther. Well, this is why we're having some of these discussions. This is what some of this is all about. And what I see here is we've got a set of people that are buying into some hype here. I'm giving you the honest facts as I know them, as I've tested them, and I've experienced it over half of a lifetime just on this subject of the 7mm larger case capacity cartridges. And energy is being ignored. I've said this before, and I'm going to keep repeating this. Energy is being ignored. I know why it's being ignored. I know exactly why it's being ignored. Because a lot of folks are buying into this idea that we've got some bullets now that have more devastating effect on game than we had, say, 20 years ago or whatever. I don't buy into that. I've been involved in the bullet making business years ago. I worked for Spirit Bullet Company. I built bullet making machines. I built dies, bullet making machines, ammunition loading machines. I built pressure test guns and accuracy guns. I've been involved with this for, an awful lot of years. I know what works, and I know where these things are being headed. It's headed in the wrong direction with misinformation. I'm trying to correct misinformation that you're being handed, because I think it's necessary to put things back on track and for people to be able to get a full grasp of what things are really about here. I've written down some figures here to compare various cartridges, various calibers, various bullet weights. We're going to start clear down here with a 257 Weatherby Magnum. That cartridge is capable of pushing 110 grain Nosler AccuBond at 3,500 feet a second. The bullet has a 418 ballistics coefficient. At 500 yards, it has 1,350 foot-pounds energy. Well, that's an acceptable deer, antelope, and sheep type cartridge to that distance. We have been led to believe that since the development of this 6.5 PRC cartridge, that the 270 Winchester is no longer going to exist. Well, this is simply nothing but nonsense. I'm going to give you some figures here, honest figures, test figures, from my vast test experience. If we take a 270 Winchester and load it with the latest powders, the powder specifically here being Reloader 26 powder, we can load 150 grain Nosler long range AccuBond to 3,100 feet a second in a 270 Winchester. That bullet has a 625 ballistics coefficient, and at 500 yards it has 1,860 foot-pounds of remaining energy. It's been stated that the 6.5 PRC is a better cartridge. Well, it's not a better cartridge. That cartridge loaded to 2,960 feet a second with a 143 grain EDLX bullet with a ballistic coefficient of 620, has 1,525 foot-pounds energy. That's 325 foot-pounds less energy than a 270 Winchester that's the same distance. You see, the 270 Winchester's been around for lots and lots and lots and lots of years. It's not about to die. It's too good to die. And it's a far better cartridge than that cartridge is with that bullet. If we're going to compare things, let's compare things honestly. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to go on to further show you the 6.5-06 Ackley improved, loaded with the 143 grain EDLX bullet with a ballistics coefficient of 620. That cartridge will push that bullet at 3,100 feet a second. I've been using this cartridge for 20 years. I know what it does. I've used it on game. I've shot all sorts of bullets in that cartridge. That cartridge will give you 1,700 foot-pounds energy with that bullet at that velocity. We step on up to the 264 Winchester using the same bullet. I've already told you what the ballistics coefficient was of that bullet. Loaded to 3,200 feet a second. Yeah, 3,200 feet a second in a 264 Winchester. Properly throated, not short-throated as Winchester designed it with their 2-diameter bullet, which is a very short throat, so you have to seat your bullet way deep. Let's fairly compare things here. Let's seat the bullet properly in the case. Let's throat the rifle properly, and let's load it properly. It can be loaded properly to 3,200 feet a second. I've been doing that for right at 40 years. I know what it does. Now we're gonna go from there to the 28 Nosler. The 28 Nosler with 175 grain Nosler long range AccuBond loaded at 3,150 feet a second will give you 1,625 foot-pounds energy at 800 yards. Well, that's actually stretching the range a little bit for elk, because I still think that you need 1,800 foot-pounds energy reasonably to take elk at that distance. Yeah, there's always going to be somebody that's going to try something different, something that really doesn't have the energy. This is what we're talking about here. That bullet has a fairly high ballistics coefficient, but it really doesn't shine The 7mm by 404 Wapiti Express loaded to 3225, which is 75 feet a second more than the 28 Nosler. That bullet, 175 Nosler partition, information that I gave to Sierra in 1985, they sent back information to me that the bullet had a ballistic coefficient of 647. If that ballistic coefficient was corrected to 8,000 foot altitude, that gave that cartridge 2,113 foot-pounds energy at 800 yards. That's information printed out by Sierra. They used to provide that very wonderful service, and they quit doing that a number of years ago for reasons of their own. The 7mm by 300 Weatherby is capable of that same velocity, shooting the same bullet for the same downrange energy. Likewise, the 7mm SDW, the same thing, energy-wise, velocity-wise, corrected to 7,500 foot altitude. That 175 nozzle partition has a ballistic coefficient of 851. Well, we're being led to believe that these latest developments in bullets, this 175 nozzle partition, has been around for quite a lot of years. We're being led to believe that some of these latest bullets, like the 175 Hornady EDLX bullet or the 175 nozzle long-range AccuBond, because of the shape of them and whatnot, that they've got these high ballistics coefficients. Well, I've known about high ballistics coefficient for 30 some odd years from the work that Sierra did for me, not only for this bullet and this cartridge, but other bullets in other cartridges, other velocities. They used to print out this information. I still have all this printed information from them from 35 years ago. They offered this service to folks. And 851 ballistics coefficient at 7,500 foot altitude. Run that through your computer. Run that through your ballistics figures. See what you come up with. You come up with 2,113 foot-pounds energy at 800 yards. According to their printed information, we've got various different sites you can go to for ballistics information. Go to the site. Figure it out. This is what I've been doing for 30 some odd years. I'm not behind the time. I'm way ahead of the time. I've been ahead of the time all along here. I've had somebody state to me, not only just somebody, but several somebodies, that the 300 Winchester is taking a back seat to the 6.5 PRC and the 28 Nosler. Oh, is that right? I'm able to run a 190 grain long-range AccuBond on the 300 Winchester or the 300 Weatherby at 3,150 feet a second. That bullet has a ballistic coefficient of 640. We've got 1,700 foot-pounds energy at 800 yards. That bullet, I haven't corrected it to 7,500 foot altitude. If we corrected that to 7,500 foot altitude, we're going to all of a sudden find out that 190 grain long-range Nosler AccuBond is right up there with ballistics coefficient and the kill ability of the 175 Nosler partition. We're led to believe that some of these latest bullets have greater terminal performance and give us better kill ability, so we don't have to run the bullets as fast. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you don't run the bullet as fast, it should be real obvious you don't have quite the terminal performance. Equal bullet construction, running things a little bit faster. The faster velocity gives you more terminal performance. The lower velocity gives you less terminal performance. We're told that these bullets expand down to 1,300 feet a second. long-range AccuBond and the EDLX bullet. Yeah, they expand down to 1,300 feet a second sometimes. Sometimes they don't. But they don't expand very much. And there's the problem. Not very much. Well, how are you going to get the terminal performance that you're trying to head us towards here if you don't have a bullet that opens enough? You can't have the terminal performance. The bullet's going to act much more like a solid than it is an expanding type of a bullet. How do I know this? Because I've tested these things. I've used these things. I've used these products, these bullets. I've used them on game. I don't go along with what somebody else might happen to say. Randy's been the guy that's always had to do it himself. I want to test it myself. I want to try it. I want to see what it does. I don't need anybody to tell me that this bullet is superior because it has greater terminal performance, when I know it doesn't have greater terminal performance when it's slowed way down. It doesn't work like that. It's got quite a lot of terminal performance when it starts, but here's part of the problem. These bullets that are supposed to expand down to these low velocities, what this really means is that they expand way too violently and way too much at close velocities. So what we've got here is a trade-off. I've used a tremendous amount of different type of bullets in my lifetime in a lot of calibers, and I don't think there's anybody that's got any more experience with the 7mm than I do. All the chamberings that I've chambered over my years of gun building experience and the game that I've shot and people that have been with me and family, I know what works. These bullets that are being described to expand down to 1,300 feet a second, I'm going to fairly squarely explain to you that we shouldn't be shooting at anything probably past the distance where that bullet is slowed down below about 1,800 feet a second. At 1,800 feet a second, we've got appreciably more bullet expansion. We've still got into play these things that are being described as more terminal performance in bullets. So if you're going to talk about terminal performance, you better have some velocity to go with it. If you don't have the velocity to go with it, you just don't understand what the terminal performance is. I understand what it is. I know what it does. I know what I've tested. Repeatedly. I try all these new products. I want to try it. I want to see if there's something that's better. If there's something that's better, I'm going to load it. I'm going to work up loads for the rifles that I build for folks, and you're going to have the best package you can possibly get. But time and time again, I find out, testing some of these latest products, bullets specifically, that they just don't quite live up to what's being hyped up that they're capable of. I go right straight back to the 175 Nosler Petition in 7mm. I've been using it for years. I know what works. The bullet will expand. The bullet will do its job. I can verify to that fact, clear out to shooting game at extreme range, which is too far for most people, out there around 800 to 1,000 yards. It'll shoot through an elk quartered at those distances and expand properly. That bullet's been with us for a long time. And if we're going to talk about a little bit to do with technology, I was involved with the technology to do with that 175 Nosler Spitzer. There was a fellow at the time that worked at Nosler by the name of Gail Root. They made a small run of those bullets. Those bullets were sent over for another fellow and I here in the Cody area to use to shoot targets. They wanted us to test those bullets in rifles because Nosler did not have the capability to shoot I'd have ranged past 100 yards. We shot to 540 yards with 9 rifles with the newly developed 175 Nosler Partition that replaced the 175 Nosler Semi-Spitzer, which was before and still is a wonderful, wonderful bullet. All that information was compiled by shooting results on targets to 540 yards. Those targets were rolled up and sent to Gail Root, the head ballistician at Nosler, back in the 80s when they first came out with that bullet. And he wanted to find out if those bullets would stabilize in factory rifles chambered clear down to smaller cartridges of 7mm 08. Well, I shot it in a 7mm 08 and everything in between, clear up to 7mm by 404 and 7 by 300 Weatherby, out to, we shot at 100 and 300 and 540 yards, and those targets were rolled up and sent to Gail Root at Nosler. So you see, I've been involved in this technology thing for about half of my lifetime, just to deal with this aspect of it alone. They had no testability. It was from that data that we compiled, and it blew them out of the water because they thought that their ballistics coefficient of that 175 Nosler Partition was about 484 or something of that neighborhood. Well, drop figures proved with those test targets alone, with all those different cartridges and all the recorded velocities that we had for those cartridges, that bullet had a considerably higher ballistics coefficient than what was stated at that time when they wanted to market that bullet. Well, I've been shooting the bullet ever since. We had about 150 of those bullets sent to us at the time. We very conservatively used them in those rifles and loaded them in a couple of rifles of our own and shot elk with them. It was during that point in time that I shot a bull elk at 825 yards with that bullet. And went clear through the elk, left a hole I could stick my pointing finger in the side of that elk on the offside. The bullet went into the mountainside and the elk dropped right there. He was standing at a standard quarter to me. Well, that's awful good performance. That's what sold them on marketing that bullet to the public. And that's what's brought us to this point in time here today, that I'm sitting here talking about this. This is historical. These are facts. This is factual, truthful information that I'm offering to you here. You can't get this information from anybody else, because I was one of the several people that were involved with this from the forefront, with that bullet and the cartridges that we shot it in at the time. I've been aware all my shooting life of energy. I've read every publication put out, magazines, loading manuals. I've studied these things my entire life. I'm an incessant experimenter, gun builder, expert hand loader, using the very best components that's available at whatever point in time. There's a new powder to come out, and I see that it's got a potential somewhere in certain cartridges, I'm going to try it. I've tried all these other things. I've talked a lot about the 7mm calibers. I'm going to talk now about 30 caliber. I've been shooting a 300 Magnum. Started out with a 300 H&H in 1965. About 3 years later, I had it chambered to 300 Weatherby. I still use that rifle. I also have another 300 H&H. I use those rifles. At the same time that I developed the 7mm by 404, I developed the 30 by 404 Wapiti Express. That's the full-length case and 404 case. That cartridge is capable of pushing a 210 grain long range nozzler AccuBond at over 3,200 feet a second. In rifles that I built, in my personal rifle that I use, I also developed the 338x404. I've been using that for years and years, built many of those rifles for various folks. Those two cartridges, those two calibers, with 210 grain long range AccuBonds, 200 grain nozzler AccuBonds, the 338 225 grain nozzler AccuBonds, in that 338 loaded at 3,225 feet a second. That cartridge has 1,925 foot-pounds energy at 800 yards. This is not corrected to altitude. Same way with the 30x404, loaded to, to the velocities that I'm indicating, 1,950 foot-pounds energy. To be real honest with you, the 30 caliber, when we start stretching the range out there in that 800 yard mark and further, the 30 caliber shines with enough velocity, with enough bullet weight, decent ballistics coefficient, and really it doesn't make any difference what the ballistics coefficient is. People think that it's necessary to shoot the highest ballistics coefficient bullets. It's not necessary. The fact of the matter is, we have equipment, we have some superior scopes at this day and age that we can adjust that scope for whatever our ballistic coefficient is, irregardless. So how is it that important that we have to have this super high ballistics coefficient? It's not that important. What's important is the rest of the equipment and a rifle that is capable of delivering the accuracy that's necessary to shoot at long range. I'm one of the most experienced long-range rifle builders in the country. I've been building long-range rifles for most of my lifetime, and I'm always using the best that's available or developing a cartridge, as these cartridges that I developed, to give us superior performance. And I get feedback, a lot of feedback from people from my videos, some very, very wonderful comments, very, very kind comments. If you don't have a kind comment, if you're a smart ass, you just as well not respond, because you're not going to get any information from me. You won't get any feedback. I'm taking my free time in doing these things and offering this knowledge to the gun world, for everybody. So basically what I'm saying here is, I really appreciate the people that respond in an appreciative manner, and will continue to do videos on this subject and many other things connected as time goes on. So stay tuned, because it's every time that we come up with something, it's going to get more and more detailed, and there's going to be more and more information. And enjoy it, folks.